Okay, can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, I can see your
Okay.
screen.
So I think before in what I advertised, I just advertised as conflict resolution, but I think we have to understand a little bit about conflict before we can really focus on resolution. So that's where we'll start. And I think conflict can be thought of in a couple different ways. And one is a situation in which the concerns of two people or groups appear to be incompatible. And maybe incompatible is a little bit of a strong word there as we go forward. But anyway, we can also think of it as a process. And that's really what we're going to be thinking about it here. It begins when one party in an interaction perceives that another party has prevented him, should be his or her needs from being met. So if we think about conflict, I want you to think for a second about conflict. Is it good or bad? When is it good? When is it bad? I like to start with the good. When can conflict be good? Just shout out some ideas.
Probably in trying to solve problems
Okay.
and throwing out different ideas that could be opposing.
Yep. Good point.
I think conflict could help someone grow in an area that maybe they haven't been challenged enough or they're not willing to consider. So they could help with a growth process.
I was going to say process improvement, which is kind of along the same lines of everyone has also said, as well as strength training.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Because one of the things that's interesting is that change, if you think about it, change can't really occur without conflict, because you've got a conflict, maybe not a strong conflict, maybe everybody agrees, but there's still a conflict between the new and the old. Okay, and I think that kind of plays into what each of the three of you mentioned. So what about the bad side of conflict?
It's stressful.
It's stressful. We're going to talk about that word stress quite a bit in a second.
When someone shuts down because they're not getting their way.
So this is kind of a listing, and this is in the handout that I can send anybody that's come on since I mentioned that before. Just send me an email. This is just one that I think we put together in a group, okay? Kind of interesting, of course, that we came up with more positives than negatives. And so I think it might be useful to kind of think about this, and if you have the handout, kind of keep it there as we go along. And Bess talked about stress. So let's think about stress for a minute. It's really the response of the body to any demand made upon it. Okay, and that demand can be physical or mental or emotional, whatever that response is. Okay, and it's the survival mechanism of fight or flight, and it really is necessary for us to perform life. It isn't really stress isn't really the problem. It's when there's too much stress. Okay, one of the interesting things when you look at the conflict literature is they talk about two outcomes of stress. One being eustress. That's not a common word, but I think it's a good one that gives good after feelings. So basically, the good side of conflict. You know, instead of just saying stress, we're going to kind of divide it into two pieces, and then the distress, then that's really too much stress, gives bad after feelings. So one of the things that is really important to think about, and why conflict resolution is so important, is that conflict resolution produces eustress. Failure to resolve conflict produces distress. And so one of the key things, and I really think this might be one of the most important things to remember, is unresolved conflict is the real problem, not conflict itself. if you listen to people talk in general, you would think the problem was conflict. The real problem is unresolved conflict. And so one of the things that has always helped me think about conflict is what's referred to as the conflict cycle. Okay, and the conflict cycle is diagrammed here because typically when people have some kind of a conflict, particularly a serious one, it's not a one-time thing. Okay, there are some issues. Okay, there's something that's creating this conflict, one or more issues, and sometimes they're really not obvious. Okay, they may be kind of hidden there under the surface. Okay, but what happens is, okay, I mean that's the under. What happens is when we get some conflict behavior, something triggers that. It triggers this issue bubbling to the surface. It could be an event, an action, a statement, a comment, even a facial expression that causes the issue to resurface and elicits expression of conflict behavior. And I think that's, and sometimes we treat the behavior without really kind of thinking about what the issue is. It's a little bit like root causes when we're looking at problems. Okay, is we're really looking for the root cause of that triggering event, of that behavior, and then the behaviors are the emotional and physical actions taken as a result of the triggering event. So there's a triggering event. People get upset, whatever the case. I often say when you read in the paper that two people, usually guys, I guess, had a fight in a bar, that usually didn't occur there. It usually was something at the bar, maybe a little alcohol, was the triggering event, and that was some conflict behavior and maybe some unacceptable conflict behavior. Now, one of the interesting things, and this becomes really important when we talk about organizations, okay, is these triggering events and behaviors have consequences. These are the indirect results of the conflict behavior. And not all consequences are related directly to the issue of the conflict. If you have a lot of conflict going on at work, it affects everybody. It affects the culture. Okay, those are the consequences of that behavior, and sometimes they are pretty important. And so we've had a triggering event, we've had some behavior, things kind of settle down perhaps again until there's another triggering event. Okay, and so we're really thinking about, as we analyze conflict, we're also thinking about those triggering events. So got a little situation here. I want you to read through this. Give me an idea when you've read through it, and then we'll go to the next PowerPoint slide that has some questions on it about this. So how you doing?
I'm ready.
Anybody need more time? Okay. So what's the issue here?
Well, at first it looks like the issue is that he's frustrated because he was, passed over, but I think the actual issue might be even deeper than that. I think it's actually a trust issue, maybe, between the dad and the son.
Could well be. That's really good analysis. Anybody else? So what's the triggering event here?
Something that someone assumes is a repeat offense, like they're just not communicating.
Yeah.
They
One more
continue to
time.
not communicate in the second half.
One more time. Dad overrides Bill when he supposedly had given Bill the authority to be the supervisor. And so Bess is right. There's a trust issue, and so the issue has to do with trust. It has to do with, it may or may not. I mean, it has to do with basically Dad overriding Bill, but it may be that Dad's just doing this because he's always done it. Okay, we probably need to ask some more questions. So what's Bill's behavior?
Well, he's upset.
He's upset.
But see, his dad interprets his upset behavior as a lack of maturity.
Yep.
A lack of being able to be responsible.
So what are some of the consequences here?
Shorter vacations.
Yeah. I always like the joke. Who's the real loser of the consequence here?
Well, I thought it was Bill because he has too much to lose in this situation for just being upset. He can't prove to his dad that he can run the business. I thought it was Bill. But maybe I think you're hunting towards the dad.
Bill has to do more with the actual issue. The consequences are things that happen that are not necessarily directly related to the issue. Certainly, you're absolutely right. I think the biggest loser here is Mom. She's been looking forward to this vacation for years.
Okay.
And she, I mean, moms often know exactly what's going on. So she may actually know what's going on, or she may not. Okay, she may just be wondering what in the world is going on here, particularly if she's not that involved in the farm and has an outside job or whatever. But to me, Mom is the real consequence here, and Bill certainly is a consequence, but his is more directly related to the actual issue itself. So one of the things we can think about is we have additional triggering events. Are they escalating or de-escalating? Escalating means there are more frequent triggered events and stronger conflict behavior. If we go back to the fight in a bar, that was probably an escalation. And this triggering event escalated it to the point of physical confrontation. De-escalating conflict is less frequent triggering events under less strong conflict behavior. And so when we're talking about conflict resolution, if these are serious issues, we're not going to fix them in one discussion or whatever. We might if they're minor. But in many cases, we're not. Our goal is really going to be to de-escalate the conflict and ultimately de-escalate it to the point where it really is resolved or managed. My wife likes to talk about this. Some conflicts are not resolvable. And so then you have to manage them. You have to put in place some barriers to conflict or whatever the case may be. Okay, and that would be a de-escalation of the conflict to the point where it's now manageable. So let's talk more directly then about conflict resolution. And so I like to talk about, and I, with my clients, I have do the conflict styles survey on these almost always, but we really talk about 4 types of conflict styles: competing, win-win; collaborating, I'm sorry, win-lose in competing, win-win and win, which is win-win, accommodating kind of lose-win and avoiding just lose. Okay, they're all valuable and they all have their place. But when we're talking about resolving conflict, we really are talking about collaborating. I don't know why that says accommodating, but collaborating is the key. And so collaborating involves them, but it takes time. It's the maximum use of both coordination, cooperation, and assertiveness. And so a collaborative style is used when attempting to satisfy the needs and concerns of both parties. If you go to some conflict resolution training, okay, and that's pretty common in educational arenas, you're basically learning how to be a better collaborator. That's really what conflict resolution training is about. So what we're going to talk about for a few minutes here is, and I was going to put a picture of the book here, but I forgot. A lot of this comes from a book called Getting to Yes. Ure's one of the authors. I forget who the other one is at the moment. It's a classic. It's been around a while. And they talked about a mutual gains. That's evolved to the point where most people call this interest-based negotiating now. Okay, and there's some subtle differences between mutual gain and interest-based negotiating, but they're basically the same. Okay, and so we're using these to try to approach conflict resolution or to de-escalate the content. It's an attempt to get people to synthesize aims rather than enter into win-lose competitiveness. We want people to teach people to use their collaborative style, not their competing style, is basically what we're saying. And so if we think about the two approaches, okay, the traditional competitive, and you can still go to negotiating training that focuses on this, but it's win as much as possible through negotiation, demand, claiming, whatever the case may be. Mutual gains is more provide a process for parties to reach creative mutual gain agreements. And then you can look at some more things here. Win as much, competitive, suspicious, win-lose, provide a process. Okay, and like lots of things, whether it's cows or crops or whatever, we really want some processes. We want cooperation, trusting. Bess talked a bit about trusting when we were talking about Bill. Okay, and the goal is win-win. And here are just a few more things that kind of define each of those. Okay, and you can see words on the right-hand side like define, identify, generate, work. Okay, and whereas on the other side, demands, defines, establish demands. That kind of shows the difference between the two. Now, in getting to yes, okay, there are 4 principles of mutual gain, and basically interest-based has about the same. The first one's focus on interests, not positions. Well, I think this one is kind of the key. This is really the difference between a competing style and a collaborative style. In a competing style, it's I'm in position A, somebody else is in position B, and you go at it. In a mutual gains or collaborative style, you're trying to focus on, because in almost all cases, there are some common interests, and that's where we want to start. The second one is separate the people issues from the conceptual issues. This is a fascinating one. It took me a long time to get a handle on it. We'll talk about it in a couple of minutes. The third one makes sense, invent options for mutual gain. And the fourth one then is insist on using objective criteria, particularly when you have identified places where you just disagree. Okay, you identify objective criteria. Many times before companies and unions go into negotiation, okay, they will go to this kind of training. and almost all universities that have a business school have some of this. At Cornell, it's industrial and labor relations. They've been really big on this, Bess. So there's a wonderful role play. It's kind of hard to do it online, but I want to tell you about it because I think it's a fascinating one. And when I'm in groups, I'll divide people into two, and you'll have this role play. And there are two players in this. It's husband and wife, and they're trying to decide to where to go on vacation. Okay, and the write-up talks about the fact that the husband wants to go to the mountains and the wife wants to go to the beach. And so if we have a positional negotiation, it's just going to be between how we divide up those 2 weeks. But it also goes on to talk about the fact that they're both looking for a break. They both have some interesting things in common. We'll see those in a second. And so when I do this, about a third of the people really come up with some creative solution. Go someplace that has both a mountain and a beach. And a lot of people come up with what seems like a logical one in a positional negotiation. We'll spend 1 week at each. Okay, well, that means each of them is going to be happy 1 week and unhappy the next. That's not really a good outcome for a vacation. Okay, and so if we have a positional argument, that's really where we end up. Okay, this is what they want. Joan wants 2 weeks at the beach and Bill wants 2 weeks in the mountains. And so, but they have common interests. This is the beauty of the role play, the way it's written. Okay, Joan says in the write-up she needs a break, needs a rest. Bill says we need a break. Those are pretty common interests. Okay, and they each want time with each other. Again, it's a common interest. Okay, and then there are some things that they each kind of want: swimming, sunbathing, fishing, hiking. There's some places where you can do both of this, and the same idea. Okay, probably the most difficult one in some ways is Bill's family has always gone to the mountains. Okay, and that's one that you kind of need a place like Acadia or something like that has both mountains and beach. And like I said, this is a fascinating role play to do in a group. Now, one of the interesting things is you can think about this diagrammatically. Okay, if you put mountains and beach on each of the axes, okay, anywhere on this hard line between the two is a compromise. Anywhere there, we're going to get basically the same gain. And the most common one, of course, is one week at the beach and 1 week at the mountains, which is the little red thing there. What we're trying to do is to move out, went too far, move out into this area where there's more gain between the two. Now, Stephen Covey in 7 Habits argues for win-win or no deal. He argues we need to get out there to that right-hand corner or keep going. That's probably not realistic. But so if we think back to those 4 things out there, okay, we're focusing on the interests, and so we're in order to bring that diagram out where we each have a little more gain, we're inventing options to do that, like go to Acadia or somewhere where there's a beach and a mountain. But then we have some things that we can't always have common interests, and we do something about that. So in focusing on interests, we work to understand the other party's interests. We listen and be empathic. Stephen Covey's, I never can remember whether it's the 5th or the 6th habit, but it's seek first to understand and then to be understood. Okay, and in this, both pieces are important, because if you only seek first to understand and then agree, you're being an accommodator. Okay, you're not really being a good collaborator. So you need both pieces of that. Okay, you need to discuss your own interests openly and candidly. And we've mentioned trust. Trust is really, really important in developing trust in this relationship. And you need to commit to meeting some of the other parties' interests. So to really be a good collaborator, you have to change the way you act. That's one of the most difficult things for us to do as human beings, is to change our behavior. So if we think about that, the competitive is based on power. The more power I have, the more likely I am to win. Okay. Mutual gains, it's really empathy, or I guess I would, given some of the things I've learned since I put this slide together, I would say empathy and compassion, okay, is the key to mutual gains negotiation. Interest not only in ourselves, but in the other party coming out of this. But not, if you're only interested in the other person and willing to sacrifice, even though you'll be frustrated later, you're an accommodator. So let's separate the people issues from the contextual issues. Like I said, this seems inconsistent at first. Okay, took me a long time to kind of settle on what this meant. But in fact, it's important, emanates from the key role of people. Okay, negotiators must be able to focus on the problem. That's what this really means, is be able to move beyond any emotional issues you have with this person and focus on the problem without focusing on that past baggage. That's really the key here. Okay. And that's really what they mean by separate the people issues from the conceptual issues. So there are two ways you can address this. I mean, one is try and resolve some of the people issues. The other one is, if they're irresolvable, if there are things that need to be managed, we manage them by taking them out of the picture as much as possible and focus on the contextual issues. Okay, I guess I kind of already covered that. The issues involving people should first be resolved, or at least set aside, in order to really make this work. And so one way to think about this is, in this kind of analysis, every negotiator has two interests, in the substance and in the relationship. Now, there's another role play that's just fabulous. And this is two people who are negotiating for companies. Okay, and they're actually mortal enemies. That's the way, this is the people one we want to talk about. So again, I'll talk to you about it. And they both want some oranges, and there's a limited number of this oogly orange available. And both of them, they make this one really, I mean, both of them need oranges to save people's lives. Okay, there's a little bit different. I don't remember all of the details, but and so you go through this and you read it and you say, oh, there's no solution to this, but there's a little piece inside of it that, if you're careful and if you ask questions and if you read about it, that one of them needs the rinds and the other one needs the juice. So there's a perfect solution to it, but very few people, when you do this, get it. And when they get it, they kind of light up like a tree and everybody else looks at them. Invent options for mutual gain. Again, now we're trying to move out into that area where we haven't resolved we haven't gotten everything we want, but we've gotten more than basically a compromise. Basically, this solid line here is a compromise. Okay. In fact, one of the things, there are lots of things, I guess, that did get my attention, but when people are talking about having good discussion and good dialogue, they say we need to compromise. No, you don't need to compromise. You need to collaborate. Because compromise, you're just going to divide. Another way to think of it, maybe even a better way to think of it, a compromise, you're dividing up the pie. In collaboration, you're trying to expand the pie, get a bigger pie, and then divide it up. Okay, so there's more. You got a couple extra pieces for each person. It's another way to think about that. So invent options for mutual gain. Again, you're focusing on interest, and that facilitates alternative solutions. As long as you're stuck in those positions and using power, you're not going to brainstorm. You're not going to look for other alternatives that provide this bigger pie. So we need additional alternatives. In positions, we don't need them. Okay. The negotiators can now work together to identify solutions that meet the interests of both parties. And now this is where you start brainstorming alternatives. Now, in insisting on using objective criteria, we're going to bring in a very important concept. Okay. The reality is that some interests will conflict. Using objective criteria, power will preserve the benefits of mutual gain, because that's what can happen in a negotiation. You get a nice, you brainstorm, you get a nice alternative, and then you have these few issues that are left, and the whole thing unwinds. You can see that reading about conflicts between teachers or other unions in the paper sometimes. And so consultants can help develop and quantify these criteria. But now there's an important thing here to keep that from happening, and that is in mutual gains negotiations, you need to know your BATNA. It's the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. How many of you have ever gone to a sale? Maybe it's used machinery, or it's a home sale, an estate sale, whatever the case may be, and two people get into a bidding war, and they actually pay more for it than it would have been to go out and buy it new. Okay, neither one of them knew their BATNA. Okay, because obviously in that case, unless it's an antique, buying one new would be a whole lot better than buying this used one. Okay, but they got into this bidding war. Okay. And therefore, because they didn't know their BATNA. And that's what we have for today. So I'm going to try and get back to my